It is Tuesday, July 15th. The year is 2008. My name is Steve Brown. I'm with the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project, and we are in Lexington, Kentucky at the University of Kentucky, and we're visiting today with Lieutenant Colonel Wilson McComas, retired, and his wife, Pam. Mr. McComas, can you spell your last name for us, please?
M-C-C-O-M-A-S.
And you grew up in Ashland, Kentucky, is that correct?
Well, near Ashland, in a smaller community called Russell.
And what was life like in Russell, growing up?
It's a river town of at that time, about 1,000 people. Very small high school, so you knew everybody. And it was what I would consider rural, even in today's standards, even though it was a small town.
And how many siblings did you have?
I had one brother, younger.
One younger brother. You folks, what did your life revolve around?
My father was in the hardware business, so we grew up knowing that kind of background. But hardware was little more, they sold appliances and furniture and fertilizer and pipe and cut glass and all those related things, sold paint.
Miss McComas, you grew up in a town not far from Russell?
In Winchester, Clark County. Mm-hmm.
In Winchester and Clark County. And your family, how many?
I have one brother.
Okay. You graduate from high school. You went off to the University of Kentucky.
Correct.
For college, is that correct?
Correct.
And were you in ROTC?
ROTC was mandatory for all males in any of the land-grant colleges at the time. So your freshman or sophomore year, you mandatorily attended ROTC.
What about junior, senior year?
Junior and senior year was considered the advanced program, and you could volunteer to go into it, and then they had a selection process. And I enjoyed it, and so I volunteered and was accepted into the advanced program.
And with that volunteering and the selection, were you then obligated to serve after you got out?
Yes, you incurred, really depending on it, there were so many programs at the time in 1961. They had a program you could go on active duty for 6 months and then stay 7.5 years in the reserve, or you could go active duty for 2 years, you had no reserve obligation, or you could go regular Army depending on what was offered to you. I was in the middle, and I took the 2-year obligation.
So you graduated in 1961.
Correct.
And then where did you go for your training after that?
In October that year, by this time we were married, and we went to Augusta, Georgia at Fort Gordon for, by this time I'd been branched in the Military Police Corps, so I went to the officer's basic class there.
And Ms. McComas, you two met in high school, but you started dating
in college.
And where were you at school?
I was over here in the nursing program at university. Really, it was Good Samaritan Hospital
in Lexington.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So you two start dating. You get married. How long had you been married when you were sent off?
How long were we married when I was sent off to where? To Vietnam?
To your training.
Oh, she went with me.
Okay.
We had been married 6 months, 7 months at that time.
And you were posted where, I'm sorry?
Augusta, Georgia, Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Okay.
And then from there we moved to, we already had assignment. We knew we were going to Fort Eustis, Virginia, to the 504th Military Police Company at Fort Eustis.
Now, what did you do at Fort Gordon?
Fort Gordon was just in school.
Okay.
10 weeks in school, and was a student, and then school was out, graduated, and moved to Virginia.
Training in?
Military police.
Okay. What did that entail?
I'm trying to recall. It's a long time ago. Obviously, we'd already been through basic training. We'd been through basic training at Fort Knox in 1960. So we'd already done the 8 weeks basic training.
You did 8 weeks of basic when you were in college?
In college. In the summer between our junior and senior year, everybody went. Our group went to Fort Knox. So we did our basic training there, which is all the infantry-related things. And then we went to branch. We did the military police-related things, how to do traffic stops, how to do those things. We actually went back out and requalified with all the weapons that were particular to that branch. And those related things that you would be doing as a platoon leader.
Then you went up to Fort Eustis.
Fort Eustis, Virginia, 504th Military Police Company, and I was a platoon leader.
How long were you at Fort Eustis?
18 months? Yeah, I think so. To October of '63.
Okay. What was your posting there like?
We had our first child up there, Shannon. I was number 9 of 9 lieutenants in that company. I was the data rank number 9 guy, so I was on the bottom of the list. There was a lot of people getting out shortly afterwards. Then it was only like 3 or 4. Mostly it was those things you would associate with police work. We did normal police work for the base. Military police work, traffic control, incidents, related things.
Investigations of crimes.
Of the lesser, not felonies, they had their own investigative unit that took the higher crimes. We did the things of petty larcenies and those related things.
Okay, so after 18 months at Fort Eustis, you would have been around the end of your
the 2 years, and I reverted to reserve status at that time, and went to the 88th 30th Military Replacement Training Center.
Where was that?
Here in Lexington.
Okay.
And became a company executive officer in that unit, that brigade. Stayed in there for about 2.5 years. I really enjoyed the military, and we discussed it, and volunteered for active duty in '65, and was recalled to active duty and sent to Oregon. I guess they decided that since they're going to test me to see if I was really interested, and became Provost Marshal of the Umatilla Army Depot in Hermiston, Oregon.
What's Provost Marshal do?
At an Army depot is really physical security. This was a munitions depot that had a large storage area for nerve agents, for some highly classified munitions. It turns out now they were actually spin rocket motors for rockets. They were really highly classified. We had 2 of those huge big areas. The depot, the only way you got into the depot was by picture badge, and it was physical security, responsibility for everything that involves around the security. Policing was much, much less there. It was just a highly controlled 24 square miles.
So you did that for a couple of years?
Did that for a couple of years. Then I got orders to go to Vietnam for '67. My actual orders I was to be assigned to the 18th Military Police Brigade as an assistant operations officer. Little did I know that upon arrival in Vietnam, they needed a military police captain at the First Division. So I'm sitting in the replacement battalion at Long Bend, and my name was announced on the PA system to come in, and they said, "Here's your records, get on that helicopter, you're going out to the First Division for an interview." And I'm thinking, I'd cross-trained as infantry, and I'm thinking, well, they're short infantry officers. That was going through my mind. Little did I know that they were interviewing me to take command of the MP company.
So you were thinking, oh, I'm in combat now.
I'm going to be infantry because my secondary specialty was infantry.
Okay. What was your first impression of Vietnam?
Wasn't good. When they pick you up in a bus that's got wire on the windows, because we knew why the wire was there. I checked into the 90th Replacement Battalion. There was no roof on the building they put us in. It had been raining. It was monsoon season. The next day they moved me to a building that flooded. So it was a total different transition. Even though we'd been through some training prior to going, and even for a year or two earlier, we'd been through some training. We'd seen it and participated in it. it didn't prepare you for things, the sounds, the smells, and those kind of related things.
Had you been to jungle school?
No, none of us. I had been
Okay.
to some schools, but not, you could say a jungle school. For the most part, when you got in country, you went to a 1-week thing. They gave you an orientation. It was called in-country orientation, but never to a jungle school.
What did you know about the First Division when you got there?
I knew it was an infantry division. I knew it had one military police company. We all knew that. We knew how many people would normally be in it, but other than that, I didn't have a real good feel for it.
Ms. McComas, how did you find out that your husband was going off to Vietnam?
He came home one day and said, we're moving. And it was very frightening because, you know, I can equate it a little bit to some of the wives with this Iraqi, you know, and where we are now, you know, you just, you know when you marry and get into the military that's going to happen. So I just said, okay, what do we have to do next? And then we moved back. Of course, I had no choice. You know, we had to move off of the bases. We couldn't stay like you do now.
That was not policy back then?
No. So first thing I wanted to do was get close to family, and that's what we did.
How many kids did you have?
At that point, we had our daughter, first daughter, who was 5, and we had a little 6-month-old. So our daughter was almost 5. So, you know, it just kind of went with, I knew when we just discussed him going back into the military that this was going to happen. And so, you know, I just, the thing with military wives then, we didn't have a support system other than our families. And all we had to hang on to was the letters that we would receive and, you know, things like that.
So you moved back to Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Did you go back to nursing or raising the kids?
Not his first tour. I just, you know, just was a mom, and that, you know, they needed support too. It was, you know, we didn't hear a lot of things like they do now on the war over TV and things like that, and I'm kind of glad we didn't, because I can only empathize or sympathize with the wives now who see everything going on.
Did he write good letters?
Yes, when he could, and he would. You know, I know for the Christmas he was over there in his brief spare time, he recorded a lot of beautiful music at the PX. They would let him sit there and record it, and he sent that home to me and things like that.
That was your Christmas gift? What kind of music was it?
Oh, just the good old-fashioned music. You know, who would some of the artists be? It's been so long, I've forgotten. That we have those on tapes now, but they're so old we can't get them moved.
Was it Christmas music?
A variety and
Right,
popular music, and yeah. And he said that was good for him while he was doing that, to kind of get away from the battlefield.
Sure.
So.
How did you occupy your time while he was gone?
Parenting, really, and we happened to live in a neighborhood that had a lot of support there, friends and things. And then I did take a couple of classes through the university while he was that first tour.
So you were very busy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Colonel McComas, let's go back to you. You finished that 1-week indoctrination period. You're getting sent off to First Division. Where were you sent?
Division headquarters was Zion, and the military police company headquarters was Zion. So I went to Zion and operated out of there.
What was your impression of Zion?
It was a very large base camp. Had a small airfield. We had a brigade. First brigade was on one end one whole end of the airfield, or the base, and then we had Division Support Command was there. So that was a huge component. All the supplies for the division all came through and out of there. And then you had division headquarters with associated items there. We had some aviation assets there, helicopters. The MP company. We had the medical battalion was located there too. So the big emergency room, so to speak, had Zeon, even though they had one at all the other base camps. And then the company had platoons at Fuloy Base Camp, which was Division Artillery, was there, and a lot of aviation assets were in there. But those were core assets. Aviation, huge runway, and a lot of helicopters. And then Lyke was 3rd Brigade. It wasn't as large a base camp, but it still had another airfield. And then you had Phuc Vinh initially when I got there was 2nd Brigade, but we were started shortly thereafter moving supplies and material up to Quan Loy to move that brigade because the 101st was coming in '68 and they took over Phuc Vinh.
Okay. What were your responsibilities at Zeon?
Zeon was in military police company commanders and everything associated with that. This was a normal police company in the division had about 200 people. This company had over 600 military policemen in it.
And you were a company commander?
A company commander.
So you were a captain?
A captain, and a young one at that, 26, 27 years old. And to go into a 600-man company was something totally unexpected.
Normally a company would have about 100?
150 to 200, depending on what. In the division, it was bigger because the provost marshal and his office and all that was assigned to the company. And most MP companies did not have a mess hall. We had a full mess hall. So you had those related things. So your company was bigger. It was right just a few. In those days, I think the authorization was just a little under 200. But because of the mission of this company, it was way over 600. In addition to 10 military police platoons, I had a Army infantry reconnaissance platoon that did the reconnaissance for the base camp, and I had a mortar section, 5-tube mortar section. And one of the first things that I found out when I got to the company, I walked in and I had a fire direction center set up right next to the company headquarters. And you got to remember, I hadn't seen a mortar tube since like 1961 when we fired them in basic. And to find out you had a fire direction center and 5 mortar tubes that you're responsible for increased your learning curve or attention level, whatever you want to call it. So it was an experience.
What was your mission there?
Provide military police support to the division. And in the 1st Division, I found out after a period of time, was very unique in how it wanted things, how the operations were conducted.
Can I interrupt just real briefly with one question? Who was the division commander when you got there?
General Hay.
General Hay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And General Rogers had just switched down, I think, before that. And Depew was the one before that. So it had a history of very fine people. And the general that took over after Hay was Ware. He was the one that was killed shortly. I think it was just shortly after I left. They're very proud of it. And there was a lot of people with a division that had served in no other unit in the Army other than a division, even in those days, which was really unusual. But they had ways they wanted to operate. And one of the things that happened in the division, if there was a convoy moving in the division, military police escorted it.
What was the purpose of the military police escort?
I want to say that they thought they wanted to make sure it got from point A to point B in a safe manner, because they controlled the opening and closing of the roads. They wanted security, helicopter security, so it had to be someone from the military police flying in a helicopter above it to look for things that were going to happen and control the movements and so forth, make sure the road was still open as they were still moving. We also did prisoner of war. had the prisoner of war compound within the company. Anyone that was brought in as a prisoner of war and so tagged, so identified, would be processed to the center compound area at the company. And
When you say processed, what do you mean?
if they were captured out in the division by one of the units, and then they would be brought back, and that's where the collection point was at the end, within the military police company. And we had a prisoner of war collection point there.
How many prisoners of war would you have had responsibility for at any one time?
Any one time, I think the highest numbers that we had was about 40. It could be 0 to 40. And we had some that stayed longer than others. Normally they stay 24, 48 hours and they're processed back to the main prisoner of war centers. Depending on, I think their intelligence value, depending on how much they want to interview them, is how long they stayed. And but we had a variety of men, women, and children, including babies, in there. So when they captured the family, and they would bring the whole family.
Were you responsible for any of the intake interviews of these people to
No.
determine intelligence
No.
value?
No, ours was pure security, making sure that their welfare. We had to meet the Geneva Convention marking requirements, and even in Vietnam, the Red Cross did inspections on an unannounced basis. They would show up and want to look at the compound.
How did you accommodate families and children and women?
You do the very best you can under the circumstances. We had four GP medium tents that were, I think you've seen the movies marked with on the PW on the top, and 24-hour lighting, which the infantry guys hated because we could not turn the lights off at night. That would have been a violation of the convention, so the lights stayed on. We looked after them as best we could. We provided cots if they any special medical needs. The medical battalion was right behind us, so they could walk over. So they received that. We would even actually, I told Pam this story, it was funny, I had the funniest odd request. We had a lady in there who was a very hardcore Viet Cong, very, very hardcore. She had a small child with her. And we had Vietnamese that worked for us, and we had them cook the food. So they got their traditional food. We had plenty of rice and so forth. This lady wanted chocolate milk for her baby. And I thought, this is ridiculous. So I actually had to go back and ask her through the interpreter, why are you asking for chocolate milk for your child? It was a baby. It was 6, 8 months old. She said, I've heard the Americans have chocolate milk and it's good for your children. And I thought, well, of all things, this lady asking. So we had chocolate milk. So we brought her over some chocolate milk. I thought, why not? But that was the oddest request I think I'd ever received at that point. This lady wanted chocolate milk for her child.
In addition to that mortar unit, in addition to the prisoners of war, you would have had responsibility for if you made arrests. What sorts of things might you have made arrests for?
Well, very rarely did the military police get involved in that kind of scenario. If there was a situation where there was criminal investigation needed, we actually had 2 criminal investigators with the division, so they took care of that. CID guys. We actually had detention cells at each location. They converted some facilities into them, rarely used. Someone would have to be extremely violent or something like that, and it just didn't. I don't recall it happening. I recall we used them for some people who had gotten extremely drunk and were out of control until they sobered up. We'd put them in there, but other than that, it just weren't used that much. But we still had them, and there were always those were always in the police stations. We had police stations at every base camp.
Okay.
We operated a normal police thing at every base camp. We controlled access in and out of the base camps at the gates. And we had search points for the local population. When they came into work, they came through a search point, and that was run by the military police company.
Did you guys ever have anything coming in that presented a danger?
Oh, sure.
Such as?
Well, some of them would try to carry grenades in or carry some type of munition in, those kind of things.
What was done then?
Oh, they were made prisoners of war immediately, and in most cases they would be processed and then end up back in the prisoner of war camps. Prisoner of war camps, the permanent ones, were run by the government, South Vietnamese government. They had several.
Down towards Saigon?
There were at various locations in the country. My second tour in Vietnam, I was in the Provost Marshal's office, worked out of the Provost Marshal's office at MACV headquarters, and one of the sections in that headquarters was the prisoner of war section that did that. And so at a later date I became more familiar with how they actually were processed on the other end, and we had American advisors in all of those large camps, and some of those camps ran 10,000 people, and there were several of them.
Your other primary responsibility was security for these convoys.
Correct. Security for the base camps.
Now, did you organize the convoy or just the security for the convoy?
We organized the security. We coordinated with the people who organized it, but they were normally organized by the support command.
What were these convoys made up of? What are they transporting?
Oh, everything. Munitions, fuel, building materials.
Medical?
Oh yeah, obviously medical, if they had a medical unit up there, what they needed. But it was, everything. But there were largely transportation battalions out of Long Bend that would come up. And you may have two or three battalions come and participate.
How many vehicles a day are moving out of your base?
We would organize in Zion, and when we're moving the big ones and building the base camp, Quantiloy, moving 750 vehicles a day. And you start at 7 in the morning, and the last vehicle would probably arrive at Quantiloy at 7 in the evening.
How many vehicles in a unit? In a group?
Normally 50 in a march unit, and then there would be 50 vehicles, and then there would be a space of 5 minutes between the next march unit, and then it would go out. And then it would be normally 2 military police vehicles with every march unit, and normally have the military police doubled up on the last march unit. You would have 3 versus the 2, just additional security, because that unit had responsibility. If anybody broke down, they had to stay with them to make sure they got in that night.
Okay. What were the hazards? You've brought a map in, if you don't mind holding that. Can you show us
On this map?
Zion and where you're moving to and from?
Well, actually, Zion is right here on the map. It is, in relation to Saigon, it was kind of like northeast out of there. But we moved from Zion, then we'd move up through Phu Loy over to Phu Cong, and then we would move north up through Lai Khe and all the way up to Quan Loy. The other base camp that we actually didn't use this road because could not be opened safely to put vehicles on was Phuc Vien, and that was the 2nd Brigade headquarters. It eventually moved up here to Quan Loy. But Highway 13, which they call Thunder Road, and was this highway that ran up here.
How far is it from Zion to Quan Loy?
Approximately 125 road miles.
Okay. And you guys are doing that every day?
Every day. We did that every day for 3 months.
And that's to and from?
Go up and spend a night and leave first thing in the morning, come back south, empty. They offloaded everything up there. We came back empty.
What are the hazards attendant with that mission?
Well, of course, this area from here to here is jungle, and it's right to the edge of the road. So you've got the inherent road mines, which the engineers had cleared. You got the inherent thing of ambush any point up through there. As you got a little further north, you got into some big rubber plantations, which you could actually more visibility, but then again, it was still a lot of places to hide. But you had the inherent thing of ambush all the way up and down the roadway. But now they didn't have the sophistication of the things that we're seeing in Iraq. We had road mines, which were those C4 or some type of explosive they got that blew up, but they didn't have any of the thing called IUDs or anything like that.
And the Rome plowed divisions are
The road
units
plows are constantly working and spreading and opening up the road over the period of time, because when we started, the jungle was right on the edge of the road. By the time we finished 3 months later, they had opened it back, a good 100 yards.
And so that was for the purpose of...
Purpose of security of the convoys moving up and down that.
And there are ambush units up and down?
Normally what we would have up and down the road, you would have a battalion that would be off the side of the road in the jungle, protecting the side of the road. You wouldn't see them. We were told they were there, but you're never sure if they're out there. And then of course we had procedures in space in the event that if you were attacked, what you would do. So
what were those procedures?
well, the first vehicle that was involved, the police vehicle, would engage and continue the convoy to move. Would not permit the convoy to stop. We would engage, and then you would obviously radio in, and hopefully somebody on the ground in your area would get up to you. But
do you ever have anything like that happen?
we were shot at a few times, but we actually never did stop in it. And the whole time I was there, we never actually ever stopped and engaged. It was more sniper fire. We had some units that we had some mining incidents that occurred where actually had a tank up in front of me blow up at one time in front of us. It hit a landmine, and
what was that like?
it got your attention, took your breath. We actually had to stop the convoy because the crater in the road was so deep, and of course to look at the people involved in the vehicle, but the road crater was so deep we actually had to stop. We couldn't go. It was 8-10 foot deep, and so we actually had the dump trucks back in from the other end to dump dirt in there so we could actually fill it up so we could move by that location. So that took several hours.
Any casualties?
Yes, nobody survived the tank after we got up there. It blew the turret off of it.
How did you feel about that?
I don't know, it's hard to grasp at the time. You have a very large explosion happen in front of you, so you're running off of kind of instinct and stuff. We knew the people on board because they'd been with us several weeks. Significant amount of mixed emotion. One is, you've got a lot of people exposed. The incident has occurred. You're trying to get up there, but at the same time you're trying to be cautious, not get yourself or anybody else killed or injured. And so it's, after 40-some years, you get really mixed emotions about it. But I did know that this Sergeant First Class that was on the tank.
You guys had helicopter support for these convoys?
We had one helicopter that a military police officer was in who had contact to get any kind of other support he needed.
One helicopter per convoy?
No, one helicopter all day.
Okay. And
for the entire. He moved up and down the convoy.
Okay.
So I eventually flew some of those. Not this particular group this month, but I flew some other months because I had to be on the ground for this 3-month operation we're doing at base camp. I stayed on the ground the whole 3 months.
You got quite a view of Vietnam, I'm assuming.
Oh, yes.
What was your impression of the country?
It's amazing from a jungle, and in retrospect, there's a lot of B-52 strikes, arc lights that they call them. And it looked like when you got airborne up above it looked like everybody had a swimming pool. Because when those bombs went off, they created big craters and they filled up with water, and all the water was blue. You thought, man, there's a lot of that was, maybe it was a bad joke, but there's a lot of swimming pools here. But it did that, and you got a better view of the villages, the little small villages. We had mountain yards in the northern area by Quanvoy. There were mountain yard villages.
And that's an ethnic group?
That's an ethnic tribal group in that area. And I told Pam when we started going up there in January and February, and there were some very large villages up there, the women were topless. And then after about 2 months of the GI jeering and everything, they all started putting shirts on. So that, I don't know if the men covered them up or the women got tired of getting jeered at or whatever, but I was one, you could see that happening as you went we progressively moved that base camp up there.
Ever become a discipline issue?
Not with my company. You know, I was very fortunate when I had this company that it was, except with, you know, the senior NCOs and the NCOs have been around for a while, we're all draftees.
They were or were not?
Were. And they had a totally different attitude than just a couple of years, even a year later, 2 years later. They were just good people. They got drafted. They're going to do their time. They're going to go home, and they would do whatever was right. And you didn't have discipline problems. You know, in that large a company, you could anticipate something like that, but it just didn't happen. I had really good senior NCOs that had been around for a while. You got to remember that in '68, '69, they decided that if you had a college degree and you got drafted, we could make you a staff sergeant. Well, that's almost, in our case, you know, you're coming out of high school and you really look good, so we're going to give you a PhD. In all seriousness, the guy had 6 months experience and we're going to make him a senior non-commissioned officer. He didn't understand being a soldier yet. And that created some real significant issues in late '68, '69, '70, because we lost our infrastructure, non-commissioned officer stability. But I was fortunate in my group because my first sergeant had been around since the late '40s. So I had a really good first sergeant, and my platoon sergeants were all significant, been around since the '50s. Some of them even had Korean War experience. So I had some guys that had been around for a while, and they understood what their job was, and they were really good communicators with the soldiers.
They understood the business of being a soldier.
They understood being a business with soldiers. They understood leadership. They understood how you dealt with the individuals, and so we didn't have a discipline problem. I mean, there were issues from time to time, but nothing like we saw in the late '60s and early '70s, where you were having the drugs moved in the latter part of that period. Because one of the things that I did when I was with MACV, I was in the customs and narcotics issues.
MACV is?
Military Assistance Command, Vietnam.
Okay. Was that your second tour then?
That was second tour. But the first tour, I mean, I can still remember my company clerk's name was Jerry Beavers, and he was just a super young guy. He very, very smart, and you could depend on him. First Sergeant Jackson is still alive, lives out in El Paso, Texas, and some of the others we'll see in October.
At a reunion?
At a reunion. You know, they do a company reunion. In fact, they have people at the last reunion I attended from World War II, members who were in the military police company of World War II.
From the First Division?
From the First Division, First Military Police Company, are still attending it, way up in their late 80s now.
Moving up and down that road, 13, how long did you do that?
We did that for 3 months, the big operation to get that base camp built. We did
get Quan Loy built?
Get Quan Loy built. It was they took a piece of ground that had an airstrip, and it was part of the plantation. There were some other buildings there, but that's when they started building the perimeter.
Is that Terre Rouge?
I'm not familiar with who the French people were there,
okay.
But it was a French plantation, but it was not part of Michelin. It was separate.
Okay. I asked you your impressions of the Vietnamese countryside. What about the people?
They were small, stature, physically. The ones that we had, the ones that I dealt with, we had the Vietnamese Army military police, Quan Cons. We had a platoon of those that lived with us. We had our regular workers that we had hired to work for us in our mess hall. So we had a group of about 20, 25 there. We processed the people in. For the vast majority of them were hard-working people who just wanted to make a living and exist. And the political things pulling back and forth on from both sides were very traumatic on them. The Vietnamese government wanted them to do this, and the Viet Cong wanted them to do that. And it was very hard for that normal, what they've used the term peasant, the worker that lived in, that just was hand-to-mouth existence for that day, was working for that day's food. And it was difficult for them. But I can't say that because we were so busy trying to provide support, do our job, that and we didn't go off the base camps at night. But during the day we would go out. We did little things that you could do. If we had a captured rice that we weren't going to eat, we would give it to our people that worked for us, make sure they had plenty to eat, and give away what we had. I do know there was a lot of the guys going to the schools, local areas where there were kids, and doing those things that we could do.
Such as?
Oh, give them things like balls, soccer balls, and provided medical assistance. They had medical teams that actually went out and set up in the villages on a day-to-day basis.
So humanitarian.
More related to that kind of thing. We provided security for that. We would normally send a couple of military police out with them.
Any of your civilian employees ever subjected to any kinds of intimidation?
Yes, we've had several that reported to us that their village was being infiltrated at night by Viet Cong, and they were really being pressured not to come back. And we told them, use your own judgment on how you approach it. And I allowed the people that within the company that did the normal supervision to make the judgment whether we actually, if they didn't show up, where we went ahead and paid it because of that issue. And we pretty well knew that they were being truthful with us, because some of them been with the company a couple of years. 67, the company had been there almost 2 years.
When did your tour end?
July of '68. I actually left 2 weeks before I got there, before my tour was up, because I was coming back to go to the officers' advanced course. So I came home a little early, about 2 weeks early.
Let's shift to you, Miss McComas. What's going on this whole time he's driving up and down the road there?
Well, my faith was what got me through, and my biggest fear was to look up one day and see a man in a uniform and either a priest or whatever, your religion is. Of course, in my case, it would have been a pastor, come and knock on your door, because that's the way you were told if something had happened to him. Did a lot of praying, and I tried to keep things on as even a keel for the girls as I could. And they were, our oldest daughter was at the age now, where she realized, that Mommy wasn't having a good day or something like that, and I tried to make that as infrequent as possible. So it was just, you're living by faith and praying a lot.
Where did you go to church?
Central. I'm a Baptist, and we've always been very strong in our faith, and both times, both trips he made, I depended on that a lot.
Now you know that this is a finite term. I mean, It's a year. Mm-hmm. When did you start counting days?
Oh, gosh, I don't remember. I think I just got in the habit of taking one day at a time. Maybe the last a couple of weeks, because I almost felt that, if I'd say too much to the girls too soon, there's always that chance that until he gets completely away, that something could happen. So it wasn't too long before, really, and then I would tell him that we're going to go meet Daddy at the airport, and that was one thing that's so different now, because they didn't go in big units then. He was met at the airport just by his two daughters and his wife, and now you just and he had his uniform on and everything, and I just kept thinking as he got off, especially the first tour, the people that were on that plane with him, do you all realize what he's been doing for you, and things like that. That was a big difference.
As you're getting towards the end of the year, did you become more apprehensive? Did your concerns increase?
I think, you know, a little bit because, you know, you hear so often that they're practically have their bags packed ready to come home and something happens. But again, I just relied on my faith. But yeah, I was very apprehensive, but I tried not to pass it on to my girls.
So you drove down to the airport in Lexington
In
or
Cincinnati.
in Cincinnati to meet him.
The three of us.
And what you're referencing was the practice during the Vietnam years of making individual replacements
Right.
as opposed to unit replacements.
Right.
What's the drive to the airport like?
Well, it was joyful because I knew that now, of course, that plane's not going to crash. I know it's not. You know, that was would have been the only concern, but it wasn't. He's coming home. I know he is. And it was just exciting, and the girls were just so anxious, but you know, a little afraid because Daddy had been gone a whole year, and at the age they weren't really sure. You know, they had. Of course, our littlest one was just 2, but our oldest daughter had just turned 5, and she didn't have a big memory of, you know, the daughter and father's relationship. And I think she was a little apprehensive, but the minute they saw him, she ran right to him, and I knew everything was going to be fine. But you know, the people came off the plane with him, and it was obvious that he was just getting back from Vietnam by the way we were reacting. And I just kept thinking, nobody said a word to him. And I was almost mad. So I'm glad we don't see that today.
What kind of reception do you remember receiving when you got back home?
His parents and my family were all there. And we talked about it, and we all decided that it would really have been better just for the 3 of us to actually be at the airport. And then the girls could have that time with him coming back and things. But yes, we had a wonderful reunion there at the house.
How long was he around before he had to take off again?
Next week. We were moving the next week.
Okay.
Yeah. Uncle Sam never let you too much grow under your feet. But you mean between his tours or
Well,
just,
yeah.
Oh, we
How
knew
long
what
were you
our
there
newest.
in Winchester?
Yeah, we were there the year, and then you know we knew where we would be going. That's one thing Uncle Sam always let you know where you're going next, in time to put your house on the market.
You've mentioned the reception of the people at the airport. What was the reception like among the townspeople in Winchester?
Just our neighbors. Nobody came out of their way. Yeah, that I recall. Now our church.
Okay.
You know, that was different. They were all very glad. And of course, we didn't stay there very long after he got back. So.
What did you think? At this point, the anti-war movement is not getting geared up. It becomes greater later on. But there are some people who are expressing doubts.
Right.
What kind of thoughts are going through your mind when you hear that political unrest?
Well, you know, I just had to say my husband's doing what he wants to do, and I support him 100%. I didn't really let that bother me. Now, if it had gotten to the point that it has become, I think I would have had to speak out in some way.
Did you ever bump into people who were in protest mode or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Okay. A week later, you're going where?
On the first one, we went to
Augusta, Georgia.
Back to Augusta, Georgia.
Going back to Augusta.
Back and forth.
And how long were you there?
3.5 years.
3.5 years.
And that was unique. We got, if you knew the deployment, half the military police officers were in Vietnam at any one time. So half were there. So normally you came out for a year, year and a half, and you went back. So I was due for a rotation in, let's see, I got out, finished school in '69, so I should have gone back to Vietnam in '70. I got in '68, yeah, I should have gone back to Vietnam in '70 and didn't. Because I got a job in '70 that they couldn't touch me. I became the aide to the general officer, and I was not touchable for 1 year. You got the assignment. It was mandated by Army regulation, you're going to be an aide to a general officer for 1 year. When I got that job in May of '70, they couldn't touch me.
What did you think, Miss McComas?
Oh, I was delirious for the children and myself, and also it gave me a chance to be in one place long enough that I finished my nursing degree. So that was great.
Okay. We'll just stop right there. It's
Okay.
a good place to stop, and we'll pick it up here in a second.
10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that warning was for your hand.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm being chastised.
We knew, we could tell from the back.
Okay, so you finish your nursing degree, and you're there in Augusta.
Can I brag on her for a second about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
This was the first nursing class at Augusta College had. She was also the president of the first class to graduate from Augusta College, and raised 2 kids. For 1 year of it, I was an aide to a general officer, which meant we had 100, and we counted them up. There's a reason why I know this. We had 125 invitations to go to formal events in 1 year. Had 125 invitations for formal events. That means we were in formal clothing. And she made every one of them, and then graduated with honors as president of her class. You talk about somebody dedicated.
That's the military for you.
So you had a full dance card, is what you're saying?
I left in the morning at 5 in the morning, and would normally come back in sometime that night. That's the general officer. That's his schedule. People don't understand that these people, the general officers, are busier than anybody in their unit. Picking him up at his house at 6 in the morning, or meeting him at the office at 6, and going all day as hard as you can go up until 10 or 11 at night. And Fort Gordon was a very large base to begin with, and with a lot of responsibilities. You had the military police school, you had the signal school, plus you had infantry there at that time. So there was 4 brigades in training, either at basic or advanced training at there. Plus, you had advanced officers in military police and advanced officers in basic at the signal school, and plus research and development at both places. So.
Who was the general?
John Charles Fremont Tilson III.
And what did you think about him?
After the fact, one of the finest people I was ever around. Gave me greater insight into ethics and morality in the Army at that time. And you're talking 1970, 71. That, in retrospect, was one of the finer people. He had been a division commander in Vietnam, 25th Division. That was his assignment prior to this one. He was just very, very well respected, but he had a demeanor about him. He was always quiet, and he didn't always follow what his staff suggested. He was always right, though, when he went his way in retrospect, if you looked at it after the fact. I've gained so much experience in that job. That did me well later.
Miss McComas, what's life like for a military wife staying in one place and going to 125 formal events in the course of a year, in addition to all the other stuff?
Well, I had a lot of pretty formals. I just, again, when we married for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, and in my heart, and mine and his too. And it was just, I said, okay, this is on my plate, and I'll deal with it. And I enjoyed all of it. I really did, and just felt very fortunate. We got to know Mrs. Eisenhower very well, and I mean, they took us, our children and us on the weekends. They would take us down to the camp that he used, and they just kind of integrated us into their families.
Mrs. Eisenhower.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Mrs. Mamie Eisenhower.
She would come to Augusta a lot, and would be at a lot of our things. And she and I, she would take me and talk to me about the wedding, the Eisenhower wedding. They were their grandson, and then I would share a lot of this with our children and my schooling. I don't know. I guess you just adapt, and I would not have caused him not to get that position for anything.
How often in a week, or how often did you see Mrs. Eisenhower?
Oh,
when she
gosh.
was there, 2-3 times a week.
Yeah.
Protocol in the Army states that in Army in the U.S. government protocol, she's number 4 on the protocol list. She's right under the former presidents as a former First Lady, so she was received quite a bit of respect. Also because she was also the widow of General Eisenhower, and she was well thought of from the military standpoint. Military was her family.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what she put it. This is my family. And if you recall, General Eisenhower had a cabin at the Augusta National Golf Course, so that's where she stayed. So she wintered down there. So she would stay 2 months. She would come down from Gettysburg and stay 2 months, basically February and March.
Now, was there an expectation that you would be involved in entertaining her?
Oh, it just went with there was no question.
Went with my
Yes.
job.
Exactly, that was
Right.
an unspecified,
Well, I was her military aide. The senior aide to the general became her military aide.
I see.
So when she came on base, I was her military aide.
And even times when they would have just lady things in the evenings, I would have to be there too.
What sorts of lady things?
Well, dinners,
Coffees,
desserts on the most of those, thank the Lord, were on the weekend, so I didn't have to miss school. But I was the wife of the aide, and that was my responsibility.
What was she like?
Very, very nice. Just a wonderful. He's got some wonderful stories he could tell you about her. She had a wonderful sense of humor.
just
wonderful.
an exceptionally nice lady.
And just a really all-around person. I mean, a lot of times I would have to pinch myself. She and I, for one, I know at one party in particular, she was tired, so she went back into the bedroom and did this. And so I walked back in there with her, and we just sat there talking. And I didn't feel a bit. She wouldn't allow me to feel inferior to her. She was a wonderful lady.
What lessons did you learn about being a military wife from her?
Oh gosh, that you're a multitask person. You become real quick.
That wasn't a term that was in vogue in those days.
No, but that's what I was and didn't realize it. I was very, very proud. I felt proud, and I feel proud even today. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for him to get to do today. And I'm just real proud of what he accomplished, too. And our children, they had a whole different outlook on the world, and still do. And they've all been very successful. We lived many places, and they never met a stranger. So I think it was a gift, really.
Let's go back to you, Colonel McComas. You mentioned early on you mentioned that you went back to school at Augusta. Is that correct?
I went back to the officer's advanced course there, which was 1 year.
What did that involve?
That was a preparation course for your next assignments, battalion executive officers, higher staff level positions. But that's what that was designed for, and it was 9 months.
And at the conclusion of that, then you became
An instructor at the military police school. So I stayed on as staff.
okay. At what point do you become
About a year after that.
okay?
This was '69. Would have been May or June of '69. I stayed there, and then several of us were selected to stay as instructors at the school. And so from when I was at the school, they were requesting nominations to be the aide, and the school nominated me. I went through an interview process and was selected.
And how long were you the aide?
A year.
So you ended up
May of '71, I would have been at 1 year.
okay. So you ended up, I'm sorry, you mentioned it before, 3 years at Fort Gordon?
3.5. Then after that assignment, I got an assignment as battalion executive officer in the military police training brigade there at Fort Gordon. So I went over to the 11th Battalion as executive officer.
At this point, what, are you still a captain, or have you moved up to major?
I'm a captain promotable, which in those days you used to put captain parentheses P, which we all understood was for permanent. It was in.
You were a lifer?
No, it was means that I was going to be a captain permanent. Even though I was on the majors list, it was going to be forever to getting promoted. And I actually went back through another Vietnam tour and came back out and was in graduate school and got promoted in graduate school. The Army was in drawdown, and so they were backing out of Vietnam, and we're not promoting as fast, is what I'm saying. I think I was on the promotion list 3.5 years from captain to major. I made it very quickly, but then they stopped it.
You made captain very quickly.
I made captain very quickly, and made major's promotion list very quickly, but then they slowed down the promotion, so it took me 3.5 years. And what they were doing was putting everything back in the right numbers. In other words, getting you 8 or 9 or 10 years service before you got your promotion. So I was promoted while I was in graduate school.
Okay. At that point, let's take a break now.
Yes, you got to hear how his career ended. It was
Back now, talking to Colonel and Mrs. McComas. We're now to the point where you're ready for your second tour in Vietnam. Let me ask your wife a question. How'd you find out about the second tour?
gosh, let me think. We had just finished I had just finished my AD degree down at Fort Gordon, and he got the letter, and I thought, well, that was good timing. At least I got to finish this time, and so we moved back home again, very close to the house we had lived in before, and life went on.
How old are the girls at this point?
Our oldest daughter was in first grade. And is that right?
No, Shannon would have been.
I've lost
This
track.
was 1970.
I guess it was our youngest who was in
71.
first grade, and our older daughter was fourth grade.
How was it different for you this time?
Well, I think I had more to occupy my mind. I started working as a nurse, and the girls were a little older, and in the period between his first assignment and the other ones, we just talked about things, that Daddy would probably have to go back and all of this, and we just said they were more prepared and were a little older, and we could talk to them more. But they worried. They were, and we said a lot of prayers like we do.
Did you go to work at a hospital or
Mm-hmm. Within walking distance of where we lived.
in Winchester?
Yeah. And I worked the midnight shift for the girls so that I could be there in the morning. I had a lady come and spend the night with them. So I could be there in the morning to get them off at school and be there when they came home, and that worked out.
Grandma and Grandpa are around? And
My mother was the only one around there, but she, I don't think that's fair to call on them too much. So that worked out.
okay. Colonel McComas, what's it like going back a second time?
Well, you're more confident. You've been there once before. I'm going to an office that I knew almost everybody in, which was nice. The provost marshal had been my brigade commander before. Had gone over, Colonel Russell. I was going to work with some people that I had known from military police school when I was on staff there. So I was going into an office I knew most everybody. I didn't know what I was going to do, even though they'd sent us to language school. Which was, in my case, I got the North Vietnamese dialect, or the Northern dialect, and I was in South Vietnamese.
That make it a little difficult?
Well, we really, it made it difficult in the Saigon area where we were living, but when we went to Da Nang, I could understand and speak to a degree what was going on, which helped there. my job was actually, when I went back the second time, was in the Provost Marshal's office. We were involved in customs and narcotics interdiction. We had teams of which we had, which in the old days was BNDD, which was DEA now, and the Bureau of Customs.
Okay, we got to back up here to make sure we get this.
Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs became DEA, Drug Enforcement.
BNDD. Okay.
Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs became the Department of DEA, Drug Enforcement
Agency.
Yeah, and
yes.
that became that. And then the Bureau of Customs, we had teams that consisted of that, and there were 3 teams, and I was on one of the teams. I was the military rep on that team, and we had responsibility for customs enforcement on the soldier side, and drug enforcement and for Vietnam, and then our team operated in Thailand, even though we were based in Saigon.
What were you doing in Thailand?
We were involved in planting listening devices on fishing trawlers that were moving opium to Hong Kong, so they could be followed and interdicted on the high seas.
How did you do that?
We had covert agents in Thailand planted there maybe months before, and we would be delivering the devices to them that they would take and eventually plant on this fishing trawler. And this little device would put out beep, and we would use the American assets at the time to track those trawlers till they got to the high seas, and then either the Vietnamese Navy or the American Navy went in and interdicted them and cut out the raw opium from making it to Hong Kong to be converted to heroin.
So you're letting them get into international waters.
Correct.
And then, okay. Is that because the Thais would not permit U.S. involvement? Or
No,
the
it was the
Vietnamese?
safest way to do it.
Okay.
Actually, you knew where they were going. You weren't going out and going fishing and coming back. You made it around the tip of the south of Vietnam and started up the coast. And there were refueling stops. There were islands that they used out in the South China Sea that they would put drums of fuel, and they would stop at these islands to refuel, and so they could make it all the way, and they would be stopped there and opium taken.
And at the time, Hong Kong was still a British protectorate?
Correct. And if you couldn't allow them to get in Hong Kong Harbor because there were so many junks in there, you couldn't track them.
How far would that be from, what river are they coming down? Irrawaddy?
No, they're
From
coming.
Thailand?
No, they're coming out of Thailand. They're coming out of one of the ports in Thailand.
Okay. Okay.
And coming around up the coast. These are ocean-going fishing trawlers.
Okay. Were you ever involved directly in any of those? I mean, on site in the interdiction?
No, we watched from a field glass distance of people moving opium on mules down to where they could sell it, but we didn't have enough firepower to go in there and do anything. There was only 3 of us in Thailand.
Okay. What other sorts of things did you do?
We did that. Customs and narcotics is what we did. And we did inspections. By this time, in '72, narcotics was becoming a major issue with the soldiers there. Major issue. Heroin was so cheap. You could buy a tenth of an ounce for $1 on the street, pure, 96% pure. And our job was to interdict that and stop it from getting to the American soldiers. But there was so much of it. It was so plentiful. It was very, very difficult to do.
You alluded to this earlier in our conversation. You talked about the difference in morale and attitude in the forces
you could
during
see,
your second tour.
Yeah, you could see the difference, even though I wasn't with troops. The troops assigned to anywhere there were troops, but we were associated with them. It was a total different attitude. I think we had, in essence, had lost control of the working part of the Army, the non-commissioned officers and the junior officers. We needed such a supply of junior officers that we were taking people that really we should have never taken. Lieutenant Cowley is a prime example. A 19-year-old should have never been commissioned, should have never even gone through officers candidate school. And we were doing the same thing as I alluded to earlier. We're making people staff sergeants in 6 months. We lost that basic infrastructure. And so once you lose the infrastructure, the soldiers are not, you don't look after the welfare of the soldiers, you're not looking after him. He becomes an individual and he's on his own, so he just kind of operates as an individual. And so to a degree, I don't like, it's not a real good analogy, but we become almost mob-like. In other words, we didn't have control.
Became what?
Almost mob-like from the standpoint, we didn't have control of our soldiers. And we were losing control. And this drug issue was the biggest thing, is we just couldn't get our handle on it. And anybody that took any commander that took a hard view on it, and I'm talking company commanders like that, really suffered from it, because there was if you recall, there were fragging incidents where a commander would go out and they rolled a grenade in his hooch, and he was taking a stand. It just took over, and we just lost it there for a while. And we were to the late 70s gaining it back. Even after Vietnam, it took us 5 or 6 years to get a good basic infrastructure in our non-commissioned officers and junior officers to get back in, to get the leadership going again.
What sorts of measures enabled you to get it back?
I don't know if it was me. I think the Army decided.
The Army, yes.
The Army decided that we're going to rebuild our non-commissioned officer corps. We'd actually lost it. The better part of the 70s, we had good infrastructure that we'd always had, and strong non-commissioned officers and good junior officers. We suffered because we didn't have a good infrastructure there. And the Army ran, and I still believe this to today, the Army still runs on the non-commissioned officer corps. That's the basic, that's where the rubber really meets the road down there. And you can say all about all the commanders and everything, but if you don't have a good non-commissioned officer corps and good junior officers, it suffers.
You spoke very highly of the non-commissioned officers you had in your first tour.
Oh gosh, they were fantastic.
What were they like in your second tour?
First of all, I was in a staff position,
Okay.
so we didn't really have, in our office we had a couple of specialists, and they were really, they had basically been handpicked for the job, so they were really good young soldiers. But once you got outside where we were, and I'd say the military police were really suffering the same thing, based on my conversations with the people I knew. The quality had gone down because previously we had handpicked everybody coming in the military police corps. After they went to an all-volunteer Army, people were volunteering to come in. We actually went to the basic training brigades and interviewed people who wanted to be military policemen. And if the military police officers who sit on that board didn't think you wouldn't get posting into the or assignment to the advanced training military police. And that's where we saw this transition. A lot of people volunteering who wanted to came in who really shouldn't have been there. So it took a while to get all that sorted out.
You mentioned the term MACV earlier.
Yeah, Military Assistance Command Vietnam.
And that's what you were doing.
I was working out of the Provost Marshal's office there, doing the customs and narcotics.
Okay.
On one team. There were 3 teams.
Okay. How long was that tour?
That tour was 11 months. They were really standing down heavily in late '72, and standing down meaning they were cutting back on the number of forces. A lot of people were coming home. My job was done away with. Basically, there was no longer a need for it. 1st of November, thereabouts, of '72. Yes.
And so you came home?
I came home just before Thanksgiving of '72.
Okay. And I believe you said you'd spent 11 months in country?
11 months in country.
Okay. Okay. Any other aspects of that you'd like to share with us?
From the second tour?
Yeah.
It was a staff agency job, major headquarters, large headquarters, and it had those associated things from a staff officer standpoint. It was not an exciting, from my personal perspective, as being with the division, First Division, and having that kind of assignment. It was routine staff stuff. I did do a lot more traveling from the standpoint of seeing a lot more. I was in Thailand, I don't know how many times, and all over Vietnam. We flew all over Vietnam and were at various locations there. From that standpoint, I got to see more, but the time didn't pass as fast, it seemed to me.
Just because of the lack of activity?
Well, I think that, and there were periods 2 or 3 week periods we'd be in the headquarters and just kind of waiting to get going. In the division, we worked 7 days a week. At MACV, we worked 5.5 days a week. Basically, Sundays were off.
Did you have greater opportunity to, and having learned the language, did you have more interaction with Vietnamese people at that time?
We had more from the standpoint where we were living, because we were living out in the city at Saigon, but they wanted to learn how to speak English. So you're in a kind of a catch-22 there. You could, and they enjoyed having nice that Americans spoke their language to a degree.
Okay. What was Saigon like compared to being out in the villages and hamlets?
Great big city, everything associated with it, traffic. But didn't go downtown Saigon too much. Transportation was not readily available to us unless we used local transportation, and there were times when it was just not the smart thing to do to go out and use one of the local taxis or anything. So we basically stayed within the MACV compound, and Ton Son Nhut was nearby, the big air base. We actually, I lived in a hotel.
You mentioned being up at Da Nang.
I went to Da Nang during that period in '72. Went up there. We had a large customs unit up there that did the processing of the soldiers coming home.
Okay. So that's where everybody went out of to come back to the United
Well,
States?
Da Nang, Bien Hoa, went to Bien Hoa, went to Da Nang, Nha Trang. Those were the main ports that people left, and Ton Son Nhut.
Did you have issues with people trying to bring drugs back to the U.S.?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh heavens, yes. And trying to bring grenades and munitions, weapons they weren't supposed to bring back. They had we set up a series of amnesty boxes before you went into the processing area, and let people drop it in there, no questions asked, and then they would still get caught in there.
Now, I'm assuming you don't know exactly what it was like when you were there in your first tour, but there would have been records and reports. What were the numbers like in this case in terms of, was there a greater incidence of that sort of thing than there had been before? Was this an increasing phenomenon?
You're talking about drugs and...
The contraband going out.
I think in the late 60s and early 70s, they became aware that it was being moved out of the country by soldiers in their personal effects. I'm not exactly sure when they started the customs units, and these were military customs units they had not existed before, and were put together, and I'm saying it was probably 70, 71. And that's when they became aware of it, that things were getting back in the States that should never made it back.
Okay.
I know when I came back in '68, I personally think I could have shipped anything I wanted in my footlocker, because I packed my footlocker and locked it, and shipped it. Nobody looked at it.
Nobody checked it.
To my knowledge, nobody did.
What sorts of measures were being taken other than these amnesty boxes? Were they inspecting footlockers?
Inspecting everything. You could not ship anything unless it was inspected and had a customs seal on it.
Okay.
And it was re-inspected in the States.
Okay. Okay. Was there re-inspection in the States when you came back after your first tour?
My recollection, no.
Okay.
Flew in through Travis Air Force Base, and I think I put my bag up on the conveyor belt for the guy to look at it, and I got the wave through, so to speak.
Okay. Mrs. McComas, he's coming back for Thanksgiving. What are you thinking this time?
Excited. Yeah, I thought, gosh, this is the first time that we've had him for both Thanksgiving and Christmas after a tour like that. It's just, I don't know, it becomes a way of life, really, when you are military family. And we just, kind of go with things, and we take all advantage of the good things when we can. And then we make do best we can the rest of the time.
So how long are you in Winchester this time?
Right in a year.
At this point, a year, and then we stayed another year for graduate school.
Yeah, and then he got to go to graduate school not too far from here, Eastern.
At EKU?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a real gift.
Okay.
And then from there, we went on to Fort Leavenworth.
And that was, at EKU, you were studying criminal justice, correct?
Yes, got a master's in criminal justice
Got a
there.
master's. Okay. So you guys, where did you live?
Stayed right in the house they were in.
Yeah.
In Winchester.
So our girls got to live in the same house for 2 years.
And you just commuted down to Richmond then for your classes? Okay. Fort Leavenworth, what did you do there?
I was the operations officer for United States Disciplinary Barracks, which is the military prison.
That had to be an interesting,
It was a change. It was a change.
how so?
Well, you know, I'd been around Army stockades, obviously, before, but this is a prison. I mean, this is not a stockade. This is 1,500 inmates in a turn-of-the-century prison.
To include Cali.
This is a stone.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, ma'am?
I said to include Cali.
Including Lieutenant
one
Cali.
point.
Process Cali in, but I was the operations officer when Lieutenant Cali or the inmate Cali came in, and I did the processing. My office did the processing. He was the only officer we had. In the military prisons, officers get different status who have been previously been officers. So they get a different custody, they get different living areas. So
He wasn't afforded that?
he got it.
Oh, okay.
He was the only officer we had.
I see,
He was
I
the only
see.
officer we had in prison at the time.
I see.
But he
How did it differ for him?
he didn't go in a cell. He lived out in a building in a like a bedroom situation. Didn't have a private bath. He had to go down the hall, but he had a private bedroom by himself.
Sort of like a dormitory setting?
It's more similar to a dormitory. It was actually the particular building they're in was had been a hospital in previous years, and it was like in a hospital room.
Now, these 1,500 inmates, are they all military inmates or some
Every
of
one
them
of them.
civil?
All of them.
Okay. What are their crimes range from?
They're all felons. Minimum 1 year in prison. So you can figure that all the way. Guys who were there for life, for murder, or whatever, but life. So you had the full gamut. But you had to have 1 year left on your sentence before you could come there. That was the requirement.
At least 1 year.
At least 1 year.
And how long were you there?
Was at the 2.5 years. We were actually at Leavenworth 3 years because I went to Command and General Staff College my last year. That's what's also located there. And then while that 2.5 years I was there, I also went to the FBI National Academy. I was selected by the Army to go there, so I went up to the FBI Academy and attended the National Academy there in one period, 3 months.
Now, you mentioned earlier that your second tour, in the drug interdiction capacity, in the customs capacity, it was a lot slower.
From a personal standpoint, time didn't pass fast.
What was it like in this position? Is this more of a 9 to 5 kind of a job?
Where?
At Leavenworth.
Lord, heavens no.
Okay.
It's the first time I was ever handed a pager that was built in a radio. We called them bricks. You come in there and you report in, the guy hands you, says, you sleep with this. They actually put a telephone right by my bed. The Army installed a telephone right by my bed. I was the operations officer for a prison. Anything that happened in there, every guard, every soldier who was a guard worked for me.
How many was that?
Oh, good Lord, 200 or 300.
Way
Over 200. Way over 200.
And how many staff officers did you have?
I had, for officers that worked for me,
Yes.
none. I had all the NCOs. All the officers worked for somebody else.
Now, at this point, you're a major.
I'm a
correct?
major,
Okay.
and I've got 2 master sergeants that run my operation for me, and NCOs after that. And I was in heaven. I had 2 of the best NCOs you could ever want in the world.
Who were they?
Gosh, you asked me, trying to remember names. You got me blanks.
That's okay.
But it was really great. It had everything. Everybody worked for me was enlisted. I was the only officer in that whole thing, and it was fantastic. I did not have an assistant operations officer or anything. And I would go to work early in the morning, and I could not leave in the day until the evening count. In other words, we'd verified everybody was back in a cell, and we had a full count, and it matched up the numbers we're supposed to have. And we could not release anybody to supper until that count was done. So I stayed till the count was done, every day.
Do you have any escapes during that time period or attempts?
None.
No attempts?
Not that we're aware of, that I was aware of.
Okay.
This thing is, if you're not familiar with this thing was built in like 18, parts of it was built in the 1820s as Fort Leavenworth, when they started building the first fort out there. And so part of the wall was built in like 1850s, 1860s. It's a 60-foot wall that's 5 feet wide. You can walk on the top of it. And it has the old guard towers, the parapets up there, and there's a circular staircase in every one of them that goes to the top. And it's a huge old place.
What sorts of issues do you have to deal with there?
Oh, everything, anybody, any prison you can think of, you dealt with.
Okay.
Just everything.
Okay. And at the same time, you're going to FBI school?
I was at about the 18-month mark, I think, if my memory serves me correct. I was notified I'd been selected to go to the FBI National Academy. So I went to that academy, and while I was at the academy,
At Quantico?
At Quantico. It moved out to Quantico. While I was there, I was also notified that I would be going to Command and General Staff College when I came back. So that would have been the summer of '76.
Where was Command and General Staff?
Right at Fort Leavenworth. It's still there today.
Okay, Ms. McComas, he goes to Quantico. Where do you go?
Oh, thank goodness I could stay there.
Okay,
That was 3 months temporary duty.
Yes, that
Okay.
was wonderful.
so you got to stay at Leavenworth, and then he comes back and goes to Staff College, and you get to stay at Leavenworth with the girls.
And we didn't have to move out of the house we were in, which
Right.
was even better. We got to stay in the same house 3.5 years,
That's a record.
which was great.
Now I have to ask you, at this point in time, there's some big changes going on in the military involving the use female enlistment.
Well, this happened before that. When I was at Fort Gordon as the battalion executive officer, the 11th Battalion received the first female trainees that were starting military police training.
Okay.
We got 48. And you ask why 48? Well, the barracks were basically built for men. So there were no rooms. There was all open squad bays. So our squad bays were 48s. There were 48 beds in there. And so when we were notified that our battalion was getting the first trainees under the modern volunteer army that had enlisted and had finished their basic training, were coming to our battalion. So we got 48 of them.
When was that?
Would have been the fall of 1971. Yes.
What kind of attitudes did you experience with the troops at that time regarding these female MPs?
The soldiers, the actual trainees, they didn't know. Our problem was the staff, the cadre of the battalion, how to deal with it. It became an issue. The issue not so much was they're coming, that's our job, we're going to do it. The issue was we weren't set up physically. You go into a male barracks, you're set up for urinals, right? You're set up for open showers and everything is open. Plus your squad bays are open. We don't have curtains on the windows in barracks. So we end up with 48 females, and also in particular barracks, the way they were designed, there's 48 on this side and 48 on this side with a common latrine in the middle. So we had 48 males on one side and 48 females on the other. And how logistically do we deal with this? And in other words, we ended up putting doors on things that didn't have doors before. We ended up having to take some urinals out and putting in some more commodes, those kind of things. So it became more of a logistical issue. We'd had females in the military police corps before. This was not new. This was the first time they'd been trained. In 1962, when I was at Fort Eustis, we had females that came to work for us, but they belonged to the Women's Army Corps. They went back to that barracks. They didn't stay in the military police, but they came to work for us during the day, and they were military police. It was just the way the Army was set up in those days. And it wasn't until this was the first group that actually had gone through training. Previous ones had done OJT, on the job training. So we got the first 48. And then when I was at Leavenworth, the only female in the Army who was in prison at the time, was in Alderson, West Virginia, filed a lawsuit that she was not getting equal treatment under the law. Her argument was that the inmates at Leavenworth were getting better educational opportunities, better vocational training, and better treatment than she was being afforded at Alderson, so she filed a lawsuit.
So she was being held in a federal penitentiary in Alderson?
In Alderson. That was the arrangement. If any female was ever confined in the Army for any period of time, they would go to the federal system. They'd be automatically transferred. They went to Alderson, West Virginia. This girl filed a lawsuit. I was on the committee that was chaired in Washington to handle the transition if they were going to actually bring females inside the walls. We were thinking about contracting with the Kansas prison at Lansing. So I was part of that team that was doing that transition period. And this was 1976. We were working on that. I would fly back and forth to Washington, sit on that committee, and then do some work at Leavenworth.
What sorts of thinking went into, why do you end up keeping her at Leavenworth as opposed to having a contract?
It's again physical facilities at the military prison, and how much space you're going to have to dedicate. How many more females are we going to put in? We're only going to have one or two at a time. So you have, and we were in a thing where we're going to have to take a building or a wing of a building and convert it to that kind of usage. It was a security issue inside, and the argument was settled, but I don't remember how it was ever settled. I actually had some discussions with her. Talked to her on telephone a couple of times.
What was that like?
It was no different talking to any other inmate. You develop a rapport with an inmate. It's a matter of leadership. It just reverts back over to that. If they get the trust in you that they can trust what you're saying, is that you're not going to have a discipline issue in a prison. And discipline is a real issue in a prison. And it can, you get some, and you got some real ugly people, not real nice people in there. I mean, some people have really done some really bad things, and they're really mean people, need to be locked up.
What were her concerns?
She wanted to continue her education at where we were. Not only did we have vocational training, we were state certified by Kansas. You could go to college while you were in there because they offered college classes inside the walls. And she said the facilities were better that we had. I don't know how you equate that. I'd never been to Alderson. I only was familiar with what was Leavenworth, and Leavenworth was 1880s. Everything we were in was 1880s, 1900. But from the standpoint of vocational training, yeah, super, unbelievable. In fact, I ran it for about 6 months. It was state certified by Kansas as vocational training. Plus our college classes were given right inside the walls by the local college.
So big part of your mission there was rehabilitation.
Huge part
of it. If we looked at it from a criminal justice standpoint.
Which, and I don't want to get in that discussion, but it was huge on rehabilitation. Every inmate in there had a job. Every inmate had a job, whether it was mundane as sweeping floors or cleaning. Everybody had a job. Even some of our jobs paid money.
Okay. And they had educational opportunities?
All kinds of educational opportunities. We encouraged it. The more activities you encourage while you're in prison, the least problems you have.
Okay. From Leavenworth, where do you go?
Go to NATO assignment, and of all the things that happened, I get assigned to the Allied Command, Allied Command Europe Mobile Forces Land. It's a brigade. It's the only military brigade in NATO. NATO has no soldiers in the concept. It is a staff headquarters. This is NATO's brigade. We have a battalion of Italian, we have a battalion of Americans, we have a battalion of British. What else? That's a basic brigade. The commanding general changes every 2 years to a different country. While I was there, was an American. My boss was Canadian. My NCOs were Belgium, Canada, and Italian. And I was the headquarters commandant, which means I am responsible for everything that happens. All your transportation, all your billeting, all your food, and the military police work for me. as part of one of my sections. I had a communications company that worked for me. I had a headquarters company that worked for me, and I had a radio company. My communications company was telephones, was German. My radio company was British, and my headquarters company was an American, and I was their boss.
What sorts of challenges did that present?
It was really fun. It was different. The headquarters was in a vault. It was 4-position dial vault. You could not, there was only 2 people allowed to have the combination, so you didn't go to work till they went to work. And basically worked 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. And it was different. Traveled all over Europe. I probably traveled more in that 3 years than I ever did before. I mean, and we were gone, 3 and 4 weeks. And that put another challenge on her, living in Germany, and I'm gone. I mean, I'm in Norway in the Arctic Circle. I'm in England. I'm in Turkey. I'm in Greece.
What are you doing in those places?
I'm the guy that's coordinating all the billeting and for everybody that's on the exercise and paying bills.
Okay. And that's all throughout Europe, obviously, and everywhere where NATO is.
Any NATO country, we were there.
If somebody goes on an exercise,
We exercised. Our battalion exercised. We would go Italy, England a lot. We had one of the battalions that I was closely associated with, our support battalion. We were over there quite often. And
what was the mission of this battalion?
we always thought we were NATO's ox. We were the first to be gored by the Russians, so therefore everybody was involved. If you understand that, getting gored by the ox.
Yes.
So we were NATO's ox. We were out in the concept was if political unrest came up in one of these countries and they wanted NATO involvement, then we would go out and be the multinational force that would appear on the scene for NATO in the political unrest. And so if the other side, which was basically in those days the Russians, would come across, we would be the ox that got gored and bring all NATO into the fight.
The thinking being it's not just the Americans who are in
It's
the
everybody.
fight, it's the Belgians and
Everybody.
I see, because everybody in this
We had a
unit has been
multinational headquarters. Every headquarters, every nation with the exception of Turkey was in our headquarters, and we only had a 40-some man headquarters. This normal staff was there, and it was all senior NCOs and officers.
You're still a major at this point?
I'm a major.
Okay. So there's a Canadian
Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay. And he's the commanding officer?
No, he's the G1. I worked under the G1,
Okay.
which is basically that. And then there's the G2 was British, the G3 was German, and the G4 was an American. The Chief of Staff was always Belgium. And the commanding general changed every 2 years between the nations. While we were there, it was the American Major General,
Who was that?
General Winans.
Okay. Miss McComas, what's this tour of duty like for you? Other than you get to see him every day at 4 o'clock.
Oh, well, he was gone a lot again, but we lived on Patrick Henry, and I was all military, and that helped. And our 2 older girls, at this point in time, we had a little 5-year-old daughter, so and
So she
they were
came along
active.
while you were at Leavenworth?
No, in graduate school.
Graduate school,
Okay.
right. And so the 2 older ones, our oldest daughter was in high school, and she was on the volleyball and went all over Europe, and things like that playing. And our middle daughter was into what?
She was went to Heidelberg High School,
Yeah.
and Erin was the mascot. She was a cheerleader. She was a gymnast, very good.
Gymnast is
But
what
she
I'm
was the
saying, yeah.
mascot. She dressed up in the Heidelberg Lion suit at all the sporting events.
And this would be the American Military High School?
Military high school there.
So she's a cheerleader like Mom?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then our youngest daughter started first grade there, and then I had the opportunity to work part-time for a German company that sold beautiful things in the commissary area, the gift shops, and that was kind of fun. But and then we did get to travel a lot. The girls saw an awful lot over
The girls
there.
traveled actually more than we did.
Yeah, on their,
The oldest girl who was on the volleyball team at the school, they traveled all over. In fact, she was in East Berlin, played volleyball before I was even cleared to go, because I couldn't get it because of my security clearance. I couldn't go until probably 2 years after we were there. They changed it.
They weren't afraid that they'd flip her into a spy, but they were you.
If you've ever had to go through what you went through to get to East Berlin,
oh gosh.
it was a joke.
Yeah.
It was Cold War at its very best from the 1950s. You got on the train, and you had to have all this stuff stamped with the right stamps on it. You had to have all your shades pulled. You were not allowed to raise your shades. And it got so bad at one stop they changed. They took the German engine off and put a Russian engine on, so we could pull it the rest of the way. And when you would stop, all these little, bless their heart, little tiny young soldiers standing outside trying to, and we were all peeking through the windows, and it didn't matter.
Couldn't stand it.
And but anyway, it was who's in control of this particular piece of dirt and going to do it. And then we get to go to Checkpoint Charlie, and one of the things that I couldn't do was take West German marks and go in and trade them for East German marks, but she could. It was legal. I couldn't do it because I was a soldier, but it was legal for her to do it. So they would go into the bank there in Berlin and take West German marks, and it was one West German marks to 9 East German marks. So you could buy anything on the other side. You had to show that you changed money here and that you changed money over there, but you only held it up and showed it to them like this. They could only look at it through the window.
I said, don't let them touch.
Don't let it touch it.
Card.
Don't let them touch anything. And our good advisor was, I won't mention his name, but at Leavenworth we had neighbors who ended up being in Berlin. He was an attorney, he was SJA, and he put us through all this legal maneuvering. And so
Illegal.
He and his wife and their kids took Pam and I and the little one the other girl to East Berlin. And so we spent a full day in East Berlin back when it was 78, 79, somewhere along in there.
What do you take out of East Berlin? What's your memory of East Berlin?
Had a wonderful meal.
Had a good meal, but the thing that you get over there is you walk in, of course, you got to take your name tag off. Now, I'm an American soldier, and I have to take my name tag off. That's okay. That's just one of the little rules. They knew I was an American major, whatever. And we walked all around, and when they saw you coming, it was almost like, you are bad people. They were scared of us. Literally, you could see the fear. They'd back away from you. Some of them are regressive. You get pinched pretty good on an escalator.
And he almost got knocked down the escalator.
You go, if you wanted we wanted a beer, so we went down to the little beer garden while the girls were in the shopping area there, and you have to get a dirty glass and wash it yourself to get yourself a beer. And that wasn't unique. And our friend said we would need to go eat at this particular restaurant tonight, so we went in the restaurant. We walked in the restaurant, and it looked like to me the East German Army was sitting in there.
Right.
At least half the East German Army Corps was in this restaurant. It was full of East German officers. And I didn't see any Russian officers, but I'm assuming everybody went around. The music stopped when we walk in the place. Now they're playing.
They were talking.
They were talking, and we walk in the door to sit down, and it stops. I mean, it's like, you remember E.F. Hutton commercial? It reminded us of the E.F. Hutton commercial. It stopped. So we walked in and sat down, and once we sat down, everything started again. We were treated exceptionally nice in the restaurant, but when you walk in, and that's the kind of thing, it stopped, and you're going, what did I do?
You were just there.
We were just
Americans.
there. And the musical group came over and after a bit and serenaded us, the good violinist and everything. And I do remember every one of us ate. Every one of us. There was 8.
Yeah.
For less than $20.
Because of the exchange.
So the exchange rate was less than $20. And you don't tip in Europe. That's included in the thing. You do not tip. It was less than $20 for 8 people. And that's everything.
What's your memory of East Berlin, Miss McComas?
That mainly, getting pinched a little bit by this fella, but he knew he had done the wrong thing, so I took care of that. But we got to go, the friend that I was with, we got to go into the factory the famous
Meissen.
factory, and where they would have their seconds, and Meissen is so expensive, so I was able to purchase something there. And the people, though, were just very solemn. That would be walking along and everything, and just looked very.
And they weren't laughing. They weren't laughing.
No, I
and
never.
That kind of. It was just sad.
And the ones in the restaurant were, by and large, military.
It was all military.
And of course, they were a little more, laughable and things like that. But the people themselves were just very sad. I was very glad to get back through the gate there.
Okay. We still got a little bit to go, so.
But anyway.
Then when he was put on the colonel's list,
We retired.
Decided he was going right back to overseas, and he said, no, that's it.
To be full colonel.
Yeah. After 3 years at West Point, you couldn't get any better, right?
One quick note, just be conscious that you can be on camera all the time.
Okay.
And so try not to tilt your
Oh,
head
I'm looking down a lot.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
I'm sorry. I thought it was all on him most of the time.
We're good.
Okay. We've just finished talking a little bit about your experience in East Germany. Any other things that you remember about your tour of duty with NATO?
It was really, I enjoyed it. Time went by too fast. I enjoyed being around the multinational. Picked up a lot of, still friends today of the families that we were with in those days from the other countries. Some lifelong friends. It gave us an exposure to the international side of the house. And besides that, they really spoiled us by putting us in Heidelberg, which is really nice, really very, very nice. And then I got to travel some real nice cities. Where else would an American officer make East Turkey over on the Russian border in those days? See places that nobody else has seen, even today, like Izmir, Turkey. I spent a few days there. Get to do military exercises in the Arctic Circle. I did one in the winter and visited 2 other times up there. And we're 250 miles in the Arctic Circle, and it was the most fun I've ever had on military exercise at 25 below. I mean, it's hard to believe, but had a good time. Really good people up there. The folks that we dealt with in that country were just absolutely super people. Getting to go to England, probably made 20 trips to England in that period of time because of our support base was there. And just had a good time. The family got to go to England several times. And just the aspect of traveling around Europe.
What were the biggest differences that you saw between the U.S. military and some of the other NATO forces?
There wasn't a significant difference. Some of the traditions are different from the standpoint of British Army traditions are significantly different than ours, but they've been around a lot longer. Their traditions go back significantly longer than our military traditions do.
Such as?
Well, the military unit, per se. Some of their military units go back to the 1600s. And they're those kind of things. The way that they're organized, they permit people who want to be a truck driver to retire from their Army. We don't permit that. Ours is promote or out. And those are some of the things. You see people who are, privates or so forth, get to retire at 20 years because all they want to do is drive a truck. All they want to do is do this. That's one of the things that we saw was different. I'm not sure what it is today, but that was what it was then. You saw guys that were, in their late 30s who were significantly more experienced than our 19-year-olds at driving a truck. But essentially, it was all the soldiers got along well. That was the amazing thing. And by this time, though, you're talking the late 70s. We've already made that transition. We've got some real good, strong NCOs. We've got some good junior officers that are coming around on the American side. And you're running across British officers or German officers who are first lieutenants who've been around 20, 25 years. They come up through the ranks. They've got a huge amount of experience. And they've stayed within that specialty.
So the United States military has started to rebuild their NCO staff.
Well, yeah, by the late 70s, we were coming back around very, very well.
What other sorts of challenges was the military facing at that time period?
Well, I don't. It's hard to say when I was with NATO in that period. The biggest issue we were getting over was getting our NCO and junior officer structure back in. That was coming around very, very well. And I know in 1980, when I took over the command of the Criminal Investigation Unit, they were very, very strong, very, very good, had really good quality people that I was around. Of course, we did a lot of work with military police at Fort Campbell, so that was, you could see a total difference.
You went from Europe to Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Correct.
Did you notice any difference in the sort of soldiers that you were getting over this 8-10 year period?
Yes, you could see the quality was up, very much so. The recruiting command was doing a real good job on the military policemen that I was running, or I was seeing. They were well motivated. They were there for a lot of good reasons, not bad reasons. A lot of them were too young to be hired as police officers in their communities, so they were going to do 2 or 3 years in the Army to get some law enforcement experience, and then go back to their home and go through the various academies there. And of course, they would get credit for the military time towards their retirement, so it was a plus for them.
Okay. Ms. McComas, what was the transition like bringing the girls home from Europe to back to Kentucky?
It was good. They were ready, I think, to be back home. And as it happened too, my mother became very ill, so the girls and I decided that we would stay there in Winchester, and he, would come home on weekends. That was a hardship on him, but it was good. But they realized once they got back to where they had grown, well, not really grown up, where I had grown up, and what little they knew about it, is that their world was so much larger than, the friends that they may have had in the early years when he was in Vietnam and all that. So, that was an eye-opener for them. They realized just what opportunities and everything that they had had.
Well, the oldest girl was starting her freshman year in college.
Right.
Where at?
At Eastern. She was going to be a nurse.
Okay.
Erin was a sophomore. And we found out because she was in the military school system, some of the books that she was being given as a sophomore, she'd already had in the 8th grade.
Yeah.
Some of her classes.
That was a big thing.
And she had so many hours that they were going to permit her to graduate at the end of her sophomore year, and we refused.
Yeah.
Made her go one more year. She graduated at the end of her junior year and went on to college, and she was way too young. So, and that was, but that's something we couldn't control because the school system here was not as far along as the military school system in Germany was.
Incredible military systems in there.
And,
schools in the military system.
I mean, her biology book in her sophomore year was the same biology book she used in her 8th grade.
Her sophomore year
In high school in Winchester and Clark County High School was the same biology book she had had in the 8th grade in Germany. So you had to have, the kids were way ahead. So, but Shannon fortunately was able to go on to college, and she's a master's degree nurse now. And Erin, who we just spoke of, she's the information technology manager for Tony Roman International. She does all their computer stuff for them. And then number 3 is teaches for the local community college and technical school. She's a radiographer instructor.
in Lexington?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So the military was good in a lot of ways for them.
But you had a little issue getting her socialized.
The young one?
Yeah, the middle one. You had her stay
the
in
middle
school so she could get socialized.
Yes,
yeah.
she went off to college and really did not do well her first year because she was just way too young. And so in the interim, we got transferred to West Point, so she came up there. And which for a 19-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, and 4,000 young men was unique for her.
I think that's a pretty good gig.
Yeah, that's what she thought.
Yeah.
She still thinks it.
Then she took
And some of her
courses
lifelong
there.
friends are still from that bunch that she met up there.
Good. You're at Fort Campbell. What was your responsibility there?
I was the commander of the Fort Campbell Criminal Investigation District. which it supported the 101st Airborne, did Army criminal investigations for the state of Tennessee and Western Kentucky.
So now you're on the investigatory.
I'm on the investigator side.
Oh, wow. How was that different?
Oh, it's totally different. It was, we only looked at felony investigations, a lot of white-collar crime involving the Corps of Engineers and a lot of the projects they had in Tennessee, which you forget about that. We did a lot of investigations involving procurement, plus we did the normal routine things of you would associate with what went on a military base.
In the case of the Corps of Engineers and procurement, we're talking about kickbacks and things like that.
Significant, oh yeah, it's big ones. It's big ones.
Like what?
Well, the Tom Bigby Waterway, for example, we were involved in the investigation on that. When they opened the investigation, one of the companies decided that they'd been overpaid about $5 million and wrote the Corps of Engineers a check and delivered it back as we opened the investigation. So those kind of, you're talking the early 80s, and some companies willing to write a check that big because we just opened an investigation. Huge amount of, it was cost-plus contracts with no oversight. And when you get a cost-plus contract, it's really horrible. And it was a pork barrel operation down there. They were widening the Tom Bigby Waterway so they could do interwater. So it was a huge, huge pork barrel issue. Millions and millions of dollars. A lot of fake companies that didn't exist, only on paper, so forth.
So were you hands-on in that investigation or those investigations, or did
I
you
was
have people?
I had people doing them, but I was the
Okay.
supervisor investigator.
Okay.
In other words, I had to have knowledge of it, had to go out on where they were working, and so we had them working all over Tennessee and Kentucky.
So you received some kind of forensic training along the line?
I had, of course, I'd already been through the FBI Academy.
Sure.
Okay, and then before I went to a 1-month course on advanced investigative management. I attended from that course. The rest of it was maybe OJT to the degree on
OJT.
on the job training from the standpoint of how to put the files together and how they wanted them to do it, that thing, and picking up. And my job was liaison over to the commanding general of the First Division, I mean the 101st Division, and the chief of staff and those kind of things, keeping them informed of investigations going on in the area. We didn't have any responsibility to tell them about Corps of Engineer things, but things ongoing on the base and were associated with the division and supported the division. If the division went out to the field or was redeployed, we sent agents with them.
For what reason?
For criminal investigation reasons. If you remember, there was a Sinai peacekeeping force that was sent over to the Sinai there at Sharm el-Sheikh back in the 80s. I had two agents with them.
Okay.
One were with the battalion, and they stayed with the battalion for 6 months and they came home.
When you're out working these investigations, are you wearing civilian suit or are you wearing uniforms?
I'm in uniform.
Okay.
Now, I had the option of switching to civilian clothes. It was my choice. But I'd say 90% of the time I was still in uniform.
Okay. Okay. How long were you at Fort Campbell?
Almost 3 years.
Okay. And from there you went to
Fort Knox.
Fort Knox. What did you do at Fort Knox?
Found out the job I'd got at Fort Knox had been done away with. Arrived and there was a letter on my desk saying Congress has said that this job is no longer exists.
What job was that?
I was a team chief. We were going to inspect the National Guard and the reserves. That was part of a job we had, and I think I was there about 4 months, and we were sitting in a meeting, and I got called out. The secretary said, "There's a note on your desk saying we are shutting the headquarters down, and where do you want to go?" kind of thing. So I went in and got the boss out, and I said, "They are shutting it down." And so we got back, and we all started negotiating for our next assignments, which was it's coming up year.
Okay. Where'd you end up from there?
West Point.
Oh. And how many years were you at West Point?
3.
And what were you doing at West Point?
I was a provost marshal.
Okay. So your responsibilities were?
I was basically, if you think about it, as director of public safety. I was responsible for the police, the security, and vehicle registration, small investigations. But at West Point, it's more than that. We also were the honor guard. I was the staff officer responsible for the honor guard. We did all military funerals. We had a national cemetery there, so we did all the funerals there at the cemetery. In addition, that as West Point in itself is a National Historic Site, and everything associated with that. So we had about 140 military police there.
How'd you like that?
West Point, I thoroughly, absolutely enjoyed it. It gave you the one thing is it's academic. You're dealing with the very, very best people, and those people have been there for a while. And to get accepted into that to me is an elite community of just really smart, nice people. Everybody across the board were just very, very nice. And they have, you have military instructors, you have civilian instructors, and then you have the guest instructors for a year who come in and out. And they're just absolutely fantastic people.
Who were some of the guest instructors that came through?
Well, Dr. Clark from here, who was the history, he'd come up. Charles, what's Dr. Charlie's last name? The history professor here.
At UK?
He's a Civil War expert. He was our neighbor for a year. Mm-hmm. I called him Dr. Charlie, and I can't, even when he was here, I called him Dr. Charlie, and I'm having a moment on his last name. He's since retired. Anything associated with engineering professors all came in and out. But then again, you saw all the guest people coming in and out that they had. Al Haig was in and out. The presidents were always in and out. We had 2 Secret Service agents that practically lived with us on coordination. We had an FBI resident office on our base that was there. That was the nice thing about it. You were just associated with, it was a college atmosphere in a military setting. There's just, is the way it is. And the cadets, or the young people, were just super. In fact, you end up sponsoring X number who come to your house. You become their surrogate family, which is unique for college. And to this day, we've got 5 or 6 that still consider us their surrogate mom and dads.
They ever have an Army-Navy game there at Army while you were there?
No, we always played those at Philadelphia.
You ever have security responsibility during that time?
For all 3 of them.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. You start coordinating them way in advance and go down early and stay late.
What was that like?
Uniquely different.
Watching out for all kinds of different things?
Oh my gosh, it is one of the biggest things they tell you, and this is kind of anecdotal, but the mules.
Yeah, guard the mules. Yeah.
They had their own alarm system on their barn that hooked into the police station. And my predecessor, who was a friend of mine, Ken Alderson, they got to the main gate on him. The cadets or the midshipmen from the Naval Academy came in and got him. Now these guys are inside a very substantial fence, and they had built a ramp, and they had one mule that would go anywhere for a carrot. And they built this ramp, and this sucker walked up the ramp and down into a horse trailer, and they got to the gate. And I was told if they get past the gate...
They've got the mule and they're taking him out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Of course, the cadets had already gotten a goat, which they only had 20-some goats, so who knows if they had the right goat. But we only had 3 mules. And but I was told, I don't know if it was true or not, but my boss said if one of the mules gets out and it gets in their hands, says you don't have a job anymore. I took that kind of halfway serious, but no, when they went to the Army-Navy game, they had their own military police babysitters. We secreted them in and kept them over 3 or 4 nights down there, and they had their own place, and then we secreted them, well, then we took them back out. But they had military police with them. But it was from all the you worked hard when you were there because you had we actually set up a police station, and it was open 24 from about Wednesday to Sunday morning to make sure that all of our midshipmen and cadets all got home safely, and the staff that associated with them. I mean, they leased an entire hotel, 17, 18 stories. Took everything.
For all the students and
the students stayed in the hotel, and it wasn't enough. I mean, you talk about staff, faculty, students, but they did all their dances and all their receptions, and everything was done in the hotel.
You obviously had a very distinguished career. You were recognized Legion of Merit.
Yes.
And what was that for? Who did that come from?
From the Superintendent of the Military Academy,
Okay.
General Dave Palmer. Moved, by the way, as a historian.
And that was for,
I'd like to think it was recognition of work there and in my prior service. That's what I think, and that's the way I accepted it. I didn't expect it, but it. And the other thing on any of the awards, there's that one receives. There's a lot of other people that are helping you do your job, and they need the recognition too. So they're not all my awards. They belong to other people too. The stuff that I got in the First Division all belonged to those soldiers. And I can't regress, but I told you.
no, that's
Only
fine.
had 2 killed. Out of 600. And
In Vietnam. That hit you pretty hard.
Boy.
still does to this day. But we worked hard not to put them in situations, or when they got in situations, make sure they were smart enough to survive. And
What were the circumstances of those deaths?
one I couldn't have any control over. He was in country training. He was doing his jungle training in country, and he got hit by a rocket. And the other guy did something we had told him, don't do it, don't be repetitious. Don't do things same day every day, same thing. And they did it. And they watched him, and they saw it. And they did it about the 3rd or 4th day, and he pulled his Jeep up into a certain point, and it blew up. And the buddy VC blew his Jeep up. The only thing left of the Jeep was the little part in the back. His buddy that just gotten out, not very far from him, had an injured finger. And, you know, that hits me. And my other problem is I've got one kid whose name's Garcia, and the other kid's name is so unpronounceable. I have to look it up every time I do it, because it was a Polish or Ukrainian name or something like that. It was a lot of alphabet in there. And
These are the 2 men who...
the 2 men who have killed. Several wounded, but and it, you know, it was you know, during when it was happening, it was different because we were there and we were in combat. But as you get past it, it gets a little more difficult.
The memory's still
Yeah.
with you, though.
Oh gosh, I can to this day, I drove that road so much, I know where the checkpoints are in my mind and tell you the numbers. I mean, it's repetitious for months and months and months. Shanton's checkpoint 5. Bearcat was 27, or Bencat was 27.
Does he ever do that at night? Is he ever driving that at night still?
I did when I came back.
It was, and as late as his 50th birthday, and you'd been retired for how long?
2 years.
Just 2 years, okay. I had a big surprise party for him, a room full of people upstairs in our home, and he and I had gone out to dinner. He had no idea, and they all parked back by our barn. So when we went in, I thought, how am I going to get him upstairs without being obvious? So anyway, I said, oh, hon, I want to watch something on television. I know you want to watch the ball game or something. And I said, would you carry the TV upstairs for me? It was a small one. Well, when he opened the door of that bedroom and everybody said surprise, he immediately fell down like he was going to be shocked. And, you know, that stayed with him a long time.
We had, you know, a lot of things stay with you.
Yeah.
But a lot of things you forget because you just get simply getting older if you don't write them down. But I do enjoy going seeing the guys at the reunion. I'm currently the only company commander that maybe is alive. I'm not sure. I mean, from that period. But the company had a long history. In fact, the company was 90 years. They retired the colors last year. Military Police Company got retired to the day. I think they scheduled that for historic reasons, but it was 90 years to the day that they were first formed. was 1917 and 2007.
Ms. McComas, when he came back from Vietnam, were there other transitional issues like that? Or?
Oh, yeah, I had to, and the children had to realize that, you know, Mom's not fully in charge now. And I had to realize that too. And it was a slow process, you know, that he got acclimated back into the family role.
Well, car backfiring would put you on the ground.
Yeah.
Like after your first tour. Oh yeah, I'd
was-
roll in the floor.
Very restless, and he would talk a lot out frequently at night, and things like that. Of course, the children didn't see that part, but I think the main thing was getting his position back in the family.
Children ever see incidents like this car backfire?
They saw me hit the floor a couple of times.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you explain that?
Erin was so young she didn't. I don't think she understood what was going
That was
on.
playtime?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon was 5, 6. I don't remember. Anyway.
We just talked
But now,
to him.
the biggest incident happened on something happened like that. We were in an advanced course. You got to remember, there's 50 officers who have all either just came back from Vietnam or been there. And right next door to our classroom was a tank where they fired weapons into it to recover for the crime lab. And it sounds like a mortar going off when they do it. And they fired the gun down in this tank, and it sounded like a mortar going off. And there was 40 guys laying on the floor in this classroom, looking around at each other, feeling like you're the biggest fool in town. But it was a mortar, it sounded like a mortar. And we hadn't been back in Vietnam that long. And we had to get used to that thing going off next door to us because they tested weapons all the time in that crime lab. And, you know, the first time everybody was in the floor, and the second time there was few in the floor, and the third time was less. I mean, it got less each time. But
Did they do anything to prepare you for that, Miss McComas?
Oh, no. I had no connection at all with anybody from the military. My only connection would have been if they were walking up the sidewalk. Now, on his second tour, I did get quite ill, and I thank them very much for allowing him home for 30 days.
Yes,
And they did do that, and they got him home quickly.
yeah, I had the Red Cross was super.
Yes.
Always has been over the years.
That was our
And
connection.
that was see, if Red Cross don't, and I think it's today, it's the same way. If the Red Cross doesn't verify it, you don't get your emergency leaves. But you got to remember the difference in communications between today and then. I mean, even when the news people came out, they were shooting film, and
A
you
big
didn't.
can.
And you did not have it embedded. You had no news people in the division in those days. They were all in Saigon. They didn't live out there with you. We had no news people living with us. Not like today. Every battalion's got a reporter sitting in there with a broadcast camera, broadband camera, shooting live, and we didn't have that.
My cherished possession to this day is one day on the battlefield. It was your first tour. The Time magazine, there was a reporter out where they were, and he took a picture of Mac and had his helmet. I mean, he was just right in the battlefield, and had the little sign of I wouldn't take $1 million for it. And he gave him a copy of that, and then we had it blown up into a huge picture, and I wouldn't take it.
Speed graphic camera. You know what a speed
Yeah.
graphic camera is?
No, sir.
There's a kind where they took the slide out the side, flipped it over,
Oh.
and shoved it back in.
Yeah.
With the old flash bulb in the top. I was standing in the jungle, and the guy came up and said, "Need a picture." I turned around, he took it, and that's the last I saw.
Best picture I've ever had.
Mrs. McComas, I've asked him a lot of questions about what he's seen about transitions and differences in the military over the course of his career. What have you seen?
Well, I've seen, I think, again, it's all because of the way they are sending over now, not just single here and there, but going as groups. And and with that, the families are most often allowed to stay where they were on the military port, where they've got all of their, they have the commissary, they have all of that, plus friends. And usually when that happens, there's a bunch living pretty close together they're all in the same boat.
A bunch of
Right.
wives.
Yes. And I was one of the first military wives that the friends that I grew up with, had ever known to come back to Winchester and live, you know, so they had no understanding of really what was going on. But I think that's the big thing, and I am so glad that there is such, and now we have the TV, you know, and that's a good and a bad thing, I think. But, you know, they can get their husbands or wives can be on television and say Merry Christmas and things like that, so.
What about the view of the military in society? Have you noticed changes there?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, when he, like I say, there wasn't even anybody that came up and shook his hand getting off the plane. And now, oh, yes, they're getting, which they deserve, so much attention and admiration being shown. Yeah.
You got the Bronze Star, I believe, with 7 oak leaves? I'm
3.
sorry. 3.
I got the award 4 times.
4.
Are
they service or are they specific incidents?
the specific, 3 of them are specific incidents, and then one of them is for a complete tour in Vietnam with MACV, for that service there. The 3 are from particular periods with the First Division. The citations are for like 60 or 90-day periods for particular service for the Bronze Stars.
For keeping the traffic moving up and down 13? Or?
Well, I would assume being a very good company commander in all aspects of everything that we did. I make that assumption. I believe that's correct.
Okay. You have the citations?
I have the citations here.
Would you mind in here?
Yes.
You might want to look through the whole thing.
Well, the first one is the first one I opened up is for meritorious service connection with my duty with the division from August '67 to July of '68. The next one I run across is from November of '67 to February '68 in the military operations involving preparations for building that base camp. Involving the MP company. And here's another one for February of '68 to May of '68 in conjunction with military operations in Vietnam involving finishing up that operation, setting up and moving that brigade to
Quan Loi.
Quan Loi.
We've had a long discussion here. Is there anything that I've failed to talk about or that we've failed to talk about that you'd like to add now?
I think it was a lot harder on the families when we were in Vietnam for not knowing. It may be a lot harder now because they know everything is going on.
Yeah.
But they didn't know. And it's simply because the nature of when it was 40 years ago.
You didn't have email?
No emails. You didn't have videotapes. You couldn't call on the cell phone, satellite cell phone. We had Mars radio if it was up and working. There was no telephone phone calls or anything like that. So it was letters, and we had audio tapes from that standpoint. But the problem was if I was in the field and gone, I mean, you couldn't do it. I mean, you wrote letters when you came back in. When you were out and gone, when you finished up, it was 10, 11 o'clock at night and no light. And you didn't want to turn the light on because somebody might see you and create some other stuff. So, but I say this, soldiering is soldiering, whether it was 40 years ago or today. It all comes with a price to pay, regardless of what you are, Reserve, National Guard, or the regular Army, or Navy, or whatever the service is. It's still the citizen soldier concept, and it's still, and I like to have the draft. I think it puts a commitment on some people, whether they want to call it a universal draft or what. But as an Army officer, we supported the all-volunteer Army, but I just think it changed its whole personality. We got more of the citizen soldier aspect into it when we had the draft. And it's still all about the soldier. It's not about the leader. It's all about soldiers, and our responsibility to look after them and make sure that the things that they should be taken care of are taken care of, and their welfare and their well-being.
In conclusion, can you give us a few thoughts about your, just in a short time frame, doesn't have to be too short, your overall impression? You obviously had a long period of service with the military. What you think about the military, and in the First Division in particular?
Well, the First Division, first of all, it has a huge history. I mean, it was the First Division formed. It has a proud history. And I think from that standpoint, I like what they're doing now with the units, is cohesiveness. That being able to stay with the unit and go into combat with the unit. And of course, I joined the unit in combat. It had already been there a couple of years. And I think that, you know, is a little bit different from the standpoint you're coming in. It takes you a little while to get the idea behind the cohesiveness of what a unit means, and the integrity of the unit. And that's the way. And I think that makes the First Division solely special. And I think you'll find it in other branches too. They have particular units that have a long lineage and heritage involving that, and it makes you proud to be a member of that unit just starting off. And I was very proud to be associated with it. At the initial beginning, I was a little significantly nervous about it, about my abilities to be able to perform in whatever was asked of me. But I think it helped because those people were so supportive. The people had been there for a while, and then becoming a part of it, and being a small part of it since then.
And you went on to become chief of police at University of Kentucky.
Oh yes.
For how long?
10 years. Across the street from where we were being interviewed.
Yeah. Miss McComas,
Yes.
what are your thoughts about the U.S. military and the First Division in particular?
Oh, I am so proud. I really am very proud of his service, and in many ways my service too. I wouldn't change anything. I'm very proud. God bless the USA.
Okay.
We
I should have thanked you for your service, but I thank you for